All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Harp and Guitar, People and Music. And thank you very much for popping in and joining me here once again today for another episode of Whiskey's Blues Gumbo. Now, this is the show where we take weird or strange sounding blues words or phrases and try to figure out what the heck they're talking about. And today is sort of a follow-up to the last video, the last Whiskey's Blues Gumbo, where I talked about the plantation. And in that video, I made mention of the company store. So I thought I would come back and revisit that phrase and clarify and describe and give a definition to exactly what that is. So as mentioned in that previous video, the plantation video, I talked about that once the slaves were freed in the South, well, in the United States, but in the South, in that plantation system, once slavery was abolished, many African American farm workers opted to stay on to the very same plantations and continue working there as sharecroppers. Now, it wasn't only African Americans, I should also clarify, that were sharecroppers. There were many Caucasian or white sharecroppers as well, often working side by side, row next to row, with African Americans, such as the example of many of the early white blues singers that came up in the teens and 1920s as well. Guys like Frank Hutchison or the Carlisle brothers, for example. Johnny Cash as well, his family were sharecroppers. But I digress. So after the freeing of the slaves, many of them stayed on these plantations as sharecroppers. And these plantations were huge. Some of them, as I had mentioned, were so big that they had almost like their own little towns built right onto the property of the plantation itself. So you'd have the living quarters, often converted slave quarters, former slave quarters, that the sharecroppers were now living in, or newly constructed housing, often, wooden shacks. But there would be a general store, there would be a church, and after a while, schools as well. Initially, schools were not an option because, especially before the abolition of slavery, they didn't want the workers on the farm, the slaves, the African Americans, to be able to competently read or write for obvious reasons. But over time, eventually schools were built. And as mentioned, one of these was the company store or the plantation store. And this was a general store. This is where you could go and you could buy food products, dry goods, canned goods. You could buy fabric there. It was basically a mercantile or a merchantile, however you want to pronounce it. And the thing about it is, it was a company store in the sense that each plantation, each family or landowner that had a plantation, like for example Dockery's, one of the biggest, it was a company. So the store was not run by an independent merchant that just set up shop in this little makeshift town on the plantation. It was run by the landowner. It was run by the plantation owner. So it was a company store. So there were inflated prices. It was designed to keep the farm worker attached to the land. It was designed to basically keep them indebted to the landowner. So for all intents and purposes, it was basically just another form of slavery, but this now was skewed more to debt slavery. Inflated prices, you could buy on store credit, but the problem was that combination of the taxes and the inflated prices. At the end of harvest season, when you were to cash in everything that you've farmed for your area of land, your contribution to the plantation as a sharecropper, and get back your share of payment, often it wasn't even enough to cover your bill. It wasn't enough to cover your IOU at the company store. So there was a lot of animosity after a while with the African American community that were living on these little makeshift towns on the plantations towards the company store. And this started to come through in recordings. There are recordings where you hear blatantly, you know, I don't want to shop at that country store no more. Make references to where do you get your sweet sugar or that sweet honey. I got it from that company store on the plantation or down on Dockery's store. Things like that. So you hear Charlie Patton make mention of it. You hear Sunhouse make mention of it. You hear Leadbelly singing about the company store. The Red Cross store is another one. So we'll save that for another video. So there you have it. The company store on a plantation. And as I said, some of these plantations were so big they had their own separate railway stations, so they could bring in all kinds of dry goods, canned goods, basically anything that was found in a general store in town. But if you had no way of getting into town, or if town was too far away, then you basically had no choice but to shop at the company store on the plantation in which he lived and worked. It was part of the community, but also it was designed to sort of keep that community down so that they had no choice but to stay there and keep paying off their debt over and over again. So a little bit of a sad history in blues lore and blues legend and blues history, but sometimes that's the way it is with the blues. So on behalf of myself and my partner here at Harp and Guitar, Monk Music, thank you very much once again for tuning in. Thanks for popping in and joining me here today. And of course, as always, if you ever come across any strange or unusual sounding blues words or phrases, just drop us a line. Be happy to look into it, give you a definition, do a video for you. So take care, have yourselves a great day, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.